Detective Log, 11 November 1925. I've been called to a crime scene by my partner. Another murder committed. He warns me that what I'm about to see ain't pretty. I walk into the living room of the apartment. I see a broken coffee table with a blood trail leading to a man slumped against the wall. I get a closer look at the man. Jesus Christ. His face was burnt to hell and covered in blisters. Looks like he took a blowtorch to the eyes. I ask for his name, and Donald replies,
Robert James Langley.
Robert Langley. Why do I know this name? I take a closer look at his face. The bottom half looks a little familiar, but it's hard to say. Then I remember. Ypres, I respond. Donald looks surprised. I served with Langley in Belgium 7 years ago. He was a young man with barely any hair on his chin. I remember it all so clearly. How could I forget what happened that day? The incident that still haunts me. It was 1915. I was a corporal commanding a small section of men. And as young men, we were excited to fight for freedom, eager to step into battle and show our worth. 5 days in the trenches quickly changed our minds. We were made to believe that there would be glory in war, but we only got horror and chaos. I've seen strong, capable men crying and begging for God to save them. It's hard to blame them, although it's no wonder that many men abandoned their faith in God after the war. One day, Robert Langley was in the bunker, going through our supplies and making notes. He was a nervous kid, but he was clever. I was a little further to the right from the bunker, keeping a lookout. A few feet to my right was a private named Henry Miller. He was a tough fellow with a hooked nose and a thick mustache. He was filling up sandbags to use as cover. Days could get long and boring in these trenches, but not this day. This day we were up for hell. We just didn't know it yet. It was around 5 o'clock in the evening. It was still light outside but very foggy, and that's when I saw death approaching us. A yellow cloud so dense it looked like it was swallowing up no man's land and all the corpses in it. It was approaching us fast as I stood there in fear. I've seen mustard gas before, but nothing like this. This cloud was like a tidal wave about to consume us all. I finally muster up the strength to yell out loud, "Mustard gas." I run towards the bunker and tell Langley to put on his mask. I quickly grab a mask from the inventory and strap it to my face. At this point, the gas was already seeping into the trenches. I yell at Henry Miller to get his ass over here. He comes running into the bunker, coughing, and grabs a mask. The gas starts flowing inside like an overwhelming flood. I make the call. I tell the two men to close the door. As they shut the heavy steel door, I could see the other privates rushing towards us from a distance. They were too late. Private Langley asks me, "What about the others, sir?" I told him if he wants to live, he should hold that bunker door with all his weight. Private Miller agreed. I remember him saying that they were dead men by now and he wasn't planning on joining them. We stood there pressed against that door with all our strength, and that's when we heard our fellow brothers on the other side of that door. I can only imagine what the poor souls outside were experiencing. Their screams and coughs of agony went on for what felt like an eternity. The silence afterwards felt like even longer. When we walked outside the next morning, we saw dead men covered in blisters and burns. Some had clawed their fingers to the bone trying to get inside. We had no time to gather the bodies before the Germans advanced. Or maybe we just couldn't face what we did. Donald looks pale. I had forgotten that I was talking to him. I'd practically been thinking out loud, reliving the carnage. He catches me looking at him and he swallows. I apologize and go home. Detective Log, 12 November 1925. Another murder committed today. I arrive at the victim's house alone. I see a fire extinguisher lying on the ground that's clearly being used. The hose is still dripping, but no fire, only a body covered in foam. I wipe his face clean to get a better look. I see irritated skin, blisters, red eyes, foam pouring from his mouth, and a bruise on his forehead. He had been suffocated by the methyl bromide from the extinguisher. Excessive exposure can lead to respiratory failures in the lungs and harm the eyes and skin, very similar to mustard gas. This man looked like he'd seen better days. He had a hooked nose and a thick mustache with a trimmed beard and oh God, it's Henry Miller, the second private who shared my sins that day. Yesterday, Langley had burnt eyes and blisters on his face. Mustard gas blinds people. This isn't a coincidence, it's a fucking pattern. And that means there's a third victim on the way. Looks like my past has finally caught up to me.